So good afternoon, everyone, in the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand in Bangkok, and hello to people who are watching on one of our rare live streams on YouTube and Facebook. As you know, today we're here to talk about Rakhine State and the Rohingya plight, including the refugee camps in Bangladesh, and try and get some sense out of an extremely confusing, volatile situation on both sides of the Bangladesh and Myanmar borders. So I'll just run straight to introducing our panellists before we go into discussion. I'd just like to introduce on the screen, joining us from afar is Yasmin Ullah, Executive Director of the Rohingya Maya Fuino Collaborative Network. And on my far right is Thomas Keane, Senior Consultant on Myanmar and Bangladesh for the International Crisis Group. And closest to me here is Cho San Lang, Director of Peace and Development Initiatives, Kinta Group, who incidentally runs a network of researchers in Rakhine State on the ground and is constantly getting updates on the situation there. Tom, by the way, has just returned, I think, from Bangladesh this morning, so I don't think we could get a fresher update on what people are thinking in Dhaka. And Yasmin, as some of you know well, is in constant touch with the Rohingya diaspora and the situation. So I think the fact people are here, you're interested, you're obviously aware of the situation, and on both sides we've seen the Arakan Army storm through parts of Rakhine State and now taken 9 out of 17 townships, I believe, as well as Paletwa township in neighbouring Chin State. There's fierce battles going on in, I have to say, what was one of my favourite beaches in the whole country, Napoli Beach, where the Arakan Army took the Pandway airport some days ago. One wonders why, and whether tourism, well, you can see that that's the final collapse, I'd say, of tourism in the state. Could we have the mobile phone off? Thank you. And further up north, as you probably know, there have been some shocking reports out of Butidong, which is very close, the closest main town to the Bangladesh border, and now the fight's on for Mongdor, not too far away, where we'll get some updates on that shortly, as well as clearly signs that the AA is moving in on An, which is a very strategic military centre for the SAC, the State Administration Council, the Myanmar military. So that's all sort of, so active and volatile that it's changing daily, although one thing seems to be quite clear is the Arakan Army is not turning back and can only probably go further. And over the border in Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar, the refugee camps, just on 1 million Rohingya refugees are in those camps, and we're hearing, I was there myself in early May, and we're hearing increasing reports of growing crime, violence, human trafficking, drug trafficking, the rise of militant groups in the camps, as well as forced or coerced recruitment, conscription of Rohingya refugees for fighting with either the Myanmar military, believe it or not, or other groups across the border. So there's so many things going on that it does your head in. But I think our panellists today will help us make sense of the situation. So they're going to talk a bit, and we'll take questions from the floor and hopefully keep this very informal. I'm sorry we can't take questions from viewers on the web, but we'll try and do something like that in the future. So I think we'll start with Tom, fresh off the plane from Dhaka. And Kuntum, we have some maps there that maybe we can show. Thank you. Over to you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Quinn. I may be fresh off the plane. I'm not sure I'm very fresh myself. I flew out at 3 a.m, so if my head suddenly hits the table, don't be alarmed. just catching some sleep. But it was an interesting time to go to Dhaka because I think we're at a kind of watershed moment in Bangladesh-Myanmar relations. Mongdor is about to fall, as Gwen alluded to. We don't know exactly when, but it's probably going to happen in the coming weeks. You can see Mongdor, the township closest to the Bangladesh border. And then Arakan Army will have control over the entire Bangladesh-Myanmar border. The Myanmar military won't have a presence anywhere in northern Rakhine State. And the AA Arakan Army will also control all of the areas that the Rohingya fled from in 2016 and 2017. And Bangladesh only shares a land border with two countries, India and Myanmar. So that makes the Arakan Army an important partner for Dhaka. But for the time being, the relationship is really limited. Dhaka has a policy of not engaging non-state armed groups, there's essentially no contact between the Arakan Army and the civilian side of the government in Dhaka. Instead, it's the security forces, the Bangladesh security forces, particularly the intelligence wings, that are in charge of maintaining the relationship with Arakan Army. And recently, that relationship has gotten very strained since March, really, since the Arakan Army started to push into northern Rakhine State. There's quite a few reasons why this has happened, but both sides, I think, have done things that probably weren't very helpful. So a lot of my conversations in Dhaka focused on how to get the relationship back on track and also how to broaden the scope. You know, when Arakan Army is such an important partner, you can't really just delegate relationship management to the intelligence services. There needs to be a broader relationship between Bangladesh, different institutions in Bangladesh and the Arakan Army. So the fall of Mongdor, which should hopefully mark the end of the conflict in northern Rakhine at least, it's a great opportunity for a reset. Bangladesh doesn't have a lot of experience dealing with ethnic armed groups or non-state armed groups on its border, certainly not like Thailand or China, and there is a reluctance to expand engagement with the Arakan Army. There's concern about the impact it would have on relations with Naypyidaw and so on. But it needs to find its own way forward. And as I said, it's really important that the relationship is the scope of it is broadened and other actors are brought in besides the security forces. But right now, it's all about getting it back on track and getting past the antagonism on both sides. Because neither Bangladesh or the Arakan Army can afford to have an antagonistic relationship with each other. One of the contentious issues, the issues that has contributed to the poor relationship in the last few months is the forced recruitment in the refugee camps. So probably somewhere in the vicinity of 2,000 Rohingya refugees have been recruited by armed groups, primarily RSO, Rohingya Solidarity Organization. This is just in the past few months. Actually, most of the recruitment was in May alone. And most of those have been forced recruits. The estimates are around 80 or 85% were forced recruits. Some have later been transferred to the Myanmar military, as Gwen said, to help defend Mongdor from the Arakan Army. And the Bangladesh security forces haven't done enough to stop the recruitment. And during May, when it was at its peak, it really caused a wave of panic in the camps. Many young men fled from the camps and were hiding in the communities around the edge of the refugee camps. And it got so bad that many refugees, including many women, were gathering at night with sticks to attack RSO members who were trying to forcibly recruit refugees. Thankfully, the recruitment has slowed down, so it's stopped almost to nothing in the last week or so. It's not clear why. It might have been pressure on the Bangladesh government, it might have been the pushback from the refugees, it could have even been partly the weather, because there's been really bad landslides in the camps. While it's positive that recruitment has stopped, the armed groups are still rampant in the camps, and the security forces need to do much more to rein them in. And how this sort of ties into the Arakan Army relationship is Rohingya refugees are being sent into Mongdor to fight against the Arakan Army. Perception from the Arakan Army side is that Bangladesh security forces are allowing this to happen. So you can see how it leads to a difficult relationship. And it's particularly important that Bangladesh security forces stop the recruitment, because it's contributing to conflict inside Rakhine State between the Rohingya and Arakan Army, which is predominantly Rakhine. In Mongdor, RSO and ARSA are both fighting alongside the Myanmar military. And RSO, as I said, has transferred recruits to the Myanmar military as well. This is what we're being told by contacts who are still in Mongdor. They can see the different groups in the town taking up positions around the perimeter to try and defend it. So as I mentioned, Mongdor is likely to fall to the Arakan Army soon. The final stages could be quite devastating, because the Myanmar military and the Rohingya armed groups have set up for a kind of urban warfare. They don't really have anywhere to flee to. When Butidang fell, they could try and cross the mountains to Mongdor, but they're surrounded on three sides, and on the other side is the river. So unless they have boats to take them out of town, they're going to try and defend the town in a way that we haven't seen in other urban settings in Rakhine State. It's also not clear, would Bangladesh allow Rohingya to cross back, to flee the fighting, including, armed actors. So it's not clear at this stage how that fighting will play out, but it could be quite heavy casualties. Looking at Rakhine State more broadly, as Gwen said, the military now holds very little territory at all. We've actually got another map.
Yeah. Kuntam, the next map, if that's okay. No, the next map?
Oh, yeah, this
that
one. Yeah.
Maybe you need to stand up.
Yeah, well, the dark blue townships are the ones that the Arakan Army controls entirely.
If you can't see this screen very well, there's a clear image on the TV screens just at the back of the room. You can see if you turn around.
The lighter blue townships are the ones that it controls the majority of. There's still active fighting, but in all of those townships, it controls almost the entire township, and the Myanmar military is holding out in a few locations. For example, Sittwe town, Chaokyu town, around An, southern Thandwe. So, we're looking at, 80% of the territory in Rakhine State is now under Arakan Army control. And as a result, they control the largest ethnic armed group territory in Myanmar, both by size, area, and by population. It's probably 25,000 square kilometers, so an area the size of Rwanda, bigger than Israel, and it's a population of well over 1 million people. So even in a country like Myanmar, that has always had areas in the hands of non-state actors, this is a pretty significant development. But it's also uncharted waters because of the Arakan Army's location. And in some ways, that means the hard work is really starting now for the Arakan Army. If their proto-state was on the border with Thailand or China, we'd have some idea as to how it would function economically, in particular, where it would get essential services from. Both Thailand and China have, many decades of experience managing and engaging and accommodating ethnic armed groups, but Bangladesh and India don't. So that's going to affect, it's going to limit what the Arakan Army can do. It's going to be a huge challenge for the Arakan Army to navigate, as we're already seeing with the fraying relationship with Bangladesh. So the AA says that they want to emulate the WA, the United Wa State Army, and have a confederate state. They're not independent, but essentially full autonomy. And politically and militarily, they're well on the way, as you can see from the map. But in terms of economic development, infrastructure, service provision, the UWSA model is completely different, and it can't really be replicated in this part of the country. The WA use Chinese currency in the Chinese banking system. they get electricity from China, they use communication services from China. And in Rakhine, all of these things are controlled by Naypyidaw. And of course, it's shut them off since fighting started. There's no reason to think that it's going to turn the electricity back on or allow the banks to reopen in AA-controlled areas. It just doesn't make sense. It wouldn't be in its interest. Why would it help the Arakan Army out by doing this? And given the lack of connectivity with Bangladesh and India, the AA doesn't really have the option of tapping into their electricity grid or their communications networks. So this is going to make life really difficult for people in Rakhine State for a long time to come. There's no easy solutions here. And it's going to be a big test of the AA leadership and public support for the group. Even just getting, at this stage, enough basic commodities, food into the state is a huge challenge. Because Rakhine is so dependent on central Myanmar for nearly all of its essential goods. A lot of the food, fuel, agricultural inputs, they all come from central Myanmar, and the military has blockaded the state, so they're not coming in now. The AA need to find alternative supply routes, but Bangladesh and India are not ready to open the border entirely to trade. It's really urgent though, because people are suffering hugely in Rakhine State. I mean, there are reports in Sittwe, for example, of people, almost starving. The most straightforward way to improve the situation would be to reach an agreement with Bangladesh to create an informal humanitarian corridor across the border. And even more important would be allowing informal trade from Bangladesh into Rakhine State. Just getting the prices down to a normal level, like food prices down, and ensuring that there are enough commodities available in the market would have a huge positive impact. It's also in Bangladesh's interest to stabilize the situation in northern Rakhine because it doesn't want more Rohingya to cross into Bangladesh. But and the Rohingya in northern Rakhine State, at least the ones I've spoken to, they don't want to leave. They don't want to go to Bangladesh. They know the situation in the camps isn't good. The security in particular is not good. And they're also worried about if they leave, will they lose their land? Will they be able to come back? So they don't want to leave, but if they don't have food, I mean, of course, they're going to cross informally. So it's in Bangladesh's interest to, to facilitate the supply of basic goods into northern Rakhine. Already thousands of Rohingya have crossed the border informally over the past 6 months. And just one more point to touch on, I'm sure we're going to discuss this in more detail, but communal relations between the Rakhine and Rohingya. So the Arakan Army has done some serious damage over the past few months in how it's perceived by many Rohingya, and it's going to have to make a concerted effort to repair the relationship. Because one of the reasons is because the way Bangladesh sees its relationship with the Arakan Army, the Arakan Army having good relations with the Rohingya defines the Bangladesh-Arakan Army relationship as well. If the Arakan Army doesn't have good relations with the Rohingya, it can't have good relations with Dhaka. The best place to start, though, is inside Rakhine itself. But the Arakan Army should also restart its engagement with Rohingya in the camps, which was something that was happening earlier, before the fighting started. And it should also drop some of the inflammatory rhetoric that we've seen. Tweets referring to the Rohingya as Bengalis, for example. Whatever the intention, they've done a huge amount of harm. And I sense that AA is already starting to revert back to more neutral language in its recent statements, and there's a recognition, I think, that wasn't the right approach. But it says that it wants to govern for all people in Rakhine and treat people equally, including the Rohingya. So it needs to demonstrate that across Rakhine State through its actions. And that includes, in particular, Butidang and Mongdo, where the fighting has been recently. So I might wrap up there. That's covered a fair bit, and yeah.
You have indeed, thanks. I just want to pick up on one thing, which was I found when I was in the camps also, there was really also some feeling that a lot of Rohingya refugees are being kind of deceived, like offered, if you join, you'll get paid and you might get citizenship and you'll be a big man, you'll have a gun. And some of the photos we're seeing on social media certainly show Rohingya soldiers in the back of troop trucks looking pretty happy, it has to be said, some of them. I mean, obviously it's just appalling the way they're being sent in at the front line, but so I got the sense that it's not all, and as you said, this marked slowdown is interesting, but
Yeah.
and I'm sure Yasmin and Jocelyn might have some thoughts on that, but did you hear that in the...
Yeah, I mean, I think initially that was part of the dynamic early on, but I think the Rohingya that ended up in the Myanmar military quickly came to realize that it wasn't necessarily in their interest.
No, completely deceived, but
Yeah.
not quite
So-
kidnap in the middle of the night. Some have been, but...
Yeah, so I think, I mean, the military was forcibly recruiting, but it was also trying to lure,
Yeah.
to entice Rohingya to join voluntarily. And in some areas that happened, in Buthidaung in particular, and that contributed to some of the things that that happened in Buthidaung, the destruction, the arson and so on. But I think it became clear pretty quickly that
Right.
whatever promises were being made
Right.
were not being made in good faith. So I don't think that more recently Rohingya have been joining the military
Voluntarily.
expecting that they would
Get
that they would get
citizenship.
citizenship or
Right.
anything.
Okay.
But there has been, as tensions increased, that did contribute to more Rohingya joining the Myanmar military voluntarily, because among some, and it's hard to work out how many, I mean, it was probably a minority in Buthidaung, there was a sense that the Myanmar military was a better option than the Arakan Army.
Or a life stuck in in some dead end in a camp.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that there was a lot of Rohingya from the refugee camps joining the Myanmar military voluntarily. Sorry. I think it was more on the ground in Buthidaung where that was evident.
Right, thanks. And just to remind people, we're talking... The Buthidaung big attack was May the 17th, I think, where...
Yeah, that's correct. Well, that's when the town was captured, but there was fighting...
in April,
Yeah, through April and May, and somewhere around 30 Rohingya villages were burned. Almost all the non-Muslim areas of Buthidaung town were burned in the middle of April by the military and Rohingya armed groups. And then there was more destruction when the town was taken. So,
Right.
So
there's some suggestion of a revenge element when the Arakan Army did their big attack in May to get even for the use, or having visibly seen Rohingya being used by the military in their attacks in April in Buthidaung.
Yeah.
Very murky. Let's turn to Chosang Line to make sense. Let's hear what you're hearing from your network on the ground, and also this issue of conscription. I don't know if you have a thought about the use of Rohingya troops in the military, but maybe you can start with laying out how you see the situation. And could you speak into the mic? Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. Okay, let me introduce. Okay, my name is Jocelyn Lyons. I'm the Executive Director of Business Development Initiative, which is called Kingda. We working on social cohesion as well as providing humanitarian assistance in Rakhine State. Also, I also running weekly report, daily weekly reports, a weekly report. So I'm doing this for many years. So let me say about the humanitarian affairs. So since let's say like since October, the resumption of the conflict in Rakhine State, Myanmar military block and restrict all movements of the supply, good and people. So in Rakhine State for more than 6 or 7 months, there's no food. Out of the shortage of the food and supply, and even the gas, no banking, no internet, and no phone is being for 6 or 7 months. People are enduring suffering regardless of Rakhine, Rohingya, Shin, or regardless of displacements, all people are suffering. Not only the area which controlled by Rakhine State, but also the area controlled by SAC, also they are restricted everything. So I think that according to the humanitarian food cluster, there's a 300,000 people are displaced. But according to HDOC, which are under ULA's humanitarian affairs, they say 500,000 people are displaced. And it's just a rainy season, so there's no place to. People have to stay with a host community. There's no charters provided by international community, or nobody can provide anything for 7 months. People have to stay their own friend or own family. So all 7 or 8 cities which are partly or completely destroyed by airstrike and fighting against between the ULA, Arakan Army and Myanmar military. So only the UN and INGO, they already left Rakhine State. So there's nobody providing the humanitarian assistance apart from civil society, which are the operation very small, and then the need are the gap are humanitarian assistance need are very high, and there's big gap. Nobody can do it, and so that is the humanitarian, and also at the same time there's a big tension between the Rakhine and the Rohingya, as well as Rakhine and Chin, these Christian which are from Chin state, So there's big tension, and then there's things are very polarizing, and is also information. Getting information is very challenging. For 7 months, there's no internet, no telecommunications, and then, however, in Myanmar as well as abroad, there's a spreading of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. So it's quite, anything you hear is quite challenging to verify what is right, what is wrong. But I just leave Rakhine State 6 months ago. So when I was there, so I think still everything's challenging. Since last year there's a cyclone Mocha which are affecting and displaced many people. Last year May, and this year's May and October there's a big conflict. So the people living in Rakhine State are facing displacement from cyclone as well as displacement from the end conflicts. So that is so about recruitments. So it seems relationship between Rakhine and Rohingya since 2012-17, and they are getting improved, and also the Arakan armies, and which are ULA, which is ethnic angle, which are endorse interaction between communities, and so so before October the relationship is quite improved between last year October. Before last year the relationship improved between the Rohingya and Rakhine. After October relationship is quite fair. Also this is also implication of the recruitment by the SAC. So SAC Myanmar military are recruiting many, they are recruiting the Rohingyas, and the Rohingya join the Myanmar military, and the AA getting upset with this, and they have it's complicate more relationships in Rakhine State. So that is relationships with the Rohingyas. Do you have anything to say?
Right.
Yeah.
So your network also focuses on humanitarian as well as monitoring the daily life on the ground.
Yeah.
What's your take on the hunger situation that Tom was highlighting, how in Sittwe now some people are beginning to starve? Do you think it's that serious? And what could be, if the blockade stays, is there any food sources in Rakhine State?
Yeah, it's been 7 months. There's international communities, also UN, INGO. They fail to provide any assistance. I think.
Well, they've been prevented in some cases.
they are restricted, and then I believe they fail to provide the humanitarian assistance, also charter. I believe that people in Rakhine State which are deserve. So supply is quite challenging. For example, to get one bottle of petrol is very challenging. It's 30,000 or 40,000. For normally it's like before the coup there's 700. After the coup, maybe in Rakhine State it's like 5,000.
Sorry, 5,000 what?
5,000 jet.
Oh, chat,
Yeah.
which would be about $1.
Yeah, $1 something.
$1.20 or something. $1.
Now it's at 30,000, or sometimes you can find any petrol. So
Petrol per, so that's per what? Per liter?
Per liters, per liter. So, and also the family have to escape some lunch and because there is a shortage. Even though you have money, there's no supply because it's what blockade. Also the relationship with India and Bangladesh, we don't. It's in the we don't have good relationship. So only supply we have is we are illegally transporting from Bangladesh and India small.
You're talking about food.
Yeah, food and medicine and everything. Even there, like recently, there's some developments like Shin Group, so Shin Group accused or Shin Group said Arakan Army are interfering in Shin politics. That's why they changed civil society from Mizoram, and they are blocking the trade from India to Rakhine. So, and then they have inflating or complicating more challenging for civilians. And also, I think that there's only for Bangladesh, there's also some illegal trading, which are not enough. So now what happened in the international donor like UK and European, they really want to support the Rakhine State of humanitarian system. But the problem is there's a gap shortage and there is a shortage of supply. So it's civil society are very struggling how to support the communities, regardless of race and religion, even though you support them, it's difficult with challenging with how you transfer the money. So you have to transfer through many service provider which are illegal and you cannot trust them. So if you transfer and they are charging you 10%, 20% to send the money, so it's quite food and cash and everything shortage. People only just they are living in belief and they seem quite resilient even though suffering. And also like the Arakan armies which controls most part of Rakhine State, they don't have capacity to provide any assistance, any kind of shelter or food. So all family, even I have family who are part of my family who went to they decided to stay in under ULA control area. But some of my family decided to live in Rangoon, which is a capital. So it's a lot. So I believe that most people they fled the Rakhine State, and then they live whether it's in Rangoon or Mandalay or other part. But small number of the population they are under ULA control area. So I think two-thirds they left, and so yeah.
Right. I'll just follow up one thing. Yeah. There are still quite a few INGOs based in Sittwe, quite a few with mandates, and there are some INGOs with mandates in the local Rohingya camps, in Rakhine State, not in Bangladesh. Yeah. So do you get the sense that they're not able to provide?
Yeah, I think they officially they remain in Rakhine State. Let's say the UNHCR, which remain in Sittwe, or maybe some medical group, they remain in northern Rakhine State. I think the main thing is you cannot do anything. You can present you can present physically, but to deliver any assistance, you have to travel authorization from SAC. SAC generally they won't allow you to operate your activity. So what's UNI NGO doing, and they are fighting for local like humanitarian responder or their religion-based organization or to deliver some assistance. So I think not about the international, they don't want to, but the problem they being very restricted. Even they have office, but they can't do anything like for any organization, even the WFP, they can't do anything. So you will see there is a pool like warehouse attack, arson attack in Mount Dor. Also a little bit, I think I'm not attacking the international agency, but I think there's some kind of regulation or a lot of administration, so sometimes quite challenging to deliver assistance, even though you have a stock in your warehouse, because some procedures is very complicated, and so that's why like also during the cyclone time, like there's a lot of supply in Sittwe in the warehouses, and events for since May last year until now there is challenging how to deliver assistance even though there is a supply, you know.
Right. Thank you very much. Now I think we'll turn to Yasmin Ullah. If you're with us, Yasmin. Oh, there. Hi. So perhaps your outlook on some of you've listened to the other speakers, so I'm sure you have some thoughts on all that as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Gwen, and thank you for your kind invitation for me to be part of this panel. I might come off as a bit of a contrarian to the two remarks, wonderful remarks from a wonderful panelist, but from a perspective of a person from the community that is currently undergoing, process of genocide, I need to highlight certain things. And building on what Thomas has said, I think that it's important to highlight that these are not Rohingya armed groups. That is a misrepresentation of a lot of ways that Rohingya community operates, which is that we are quite fragmented by ways of violations and various different levels of systemic oppression. And that, resulted in people being in exile and displacement over and over and over again. Now, the Rohingya insurgent groups that have been violating the Rakhine people or various other groups have not only violated other groups, but also violated the Rohingya ourselves. And these, unfortunately, were not something that the international community or groups that are monitoring the situation have taken heed of our warning. There were many occasions that we've warned the international community about the collusion or potential collusion of groups like ARSA and various others with the junta, because the Rohingya villagers in Butidong and various others, but especially in Butidong years ago, were facing issues and surveillance by the junta because of the presence of ARSA, and there seems to be a lot of movement that is coordinated. There were cases of rape, kidnapping, killings in the camps and in Arakan that were that had been ongoing since 2017. So it bears repeating, and unfortunately I have to say this oftentimes, that these groups are misrepresenting Rohingya, and they're if they're called anything, they should probably be called an insurgent group. And the issue is that if they're not representing Rohingya, or if the international community or those who are in this room currently are using the term armed groups, it is equating the kind of representation that they have to other ethnic armed groups, which is not the case. Because have we had some sort of survey or referendum or any kind of questioning to every single Rohingya that exists inside the country or outside, in the camps or elsewhere? No. And so these groups are actually not representative of Rohingya. And so to actually use the Rohingya as human shield or punish us in any way, shape, or form for a very few, for bad actors, it is disproportionate to say the least. And so oppression or violations of Rohingya will continue to be an issue that makes sustainable peace impossible for Myanmar. And here's why. Any military groups that do not have a built-in system of accountability, there's no guarantee that their practice or their operation will not repeat that of the military junta. And this is, one case study. The military junta at one point were praised by, the rest of Burma, Myanmar, maybe not the ethnic groups, but at one point they were hailed heroes. And because of this lack of accountability and developments of impunity after years of this accountability being missing, or the enabling from various other actors across the region, we are seeing them brutally violating various different groups across the country for the political gain or for profits. And so I think it is important that we make that distinction and ensure that we don't fail groups of people like the women in the Rohingya community who have been raped and kidnapped in order to help this recruitment. And so when we're talking about all of these different levels of collusion or various different groups joining the military, leaving the military, fighting Arakan Army, we're leaving out a very, very clear population that did not want any of this to happen. Before I go on to talk about other aspects of this, I think it's important that I highlight a few things. There are currently 35 villages that have been burnt down in retaliation, supposedly, by the Arakan Army because certain groups of Rohingya have gone to burn down villages of Rakhine people. Now, that alone has actually displaced about 200,000 people on the ground, with very, very little communications to the outside. And there has been reports of people being caught in the middle when they are found to have phones or to be able to communicate with the outside world. They're threatened by the Arakan Army, and confiscations of phones also happen. These are not just something that happens out of the blue. It proves a pattern of violations that have been taking place. And this is the issue that I have, that I'm always contending with. Unfortunately, with various different ways that these conversations go, it often falls short of, criticizing the military groups across the country. And I'm not just talking about Arakan Army or the junta, but the ways that the junta have been so successful is that they lack accountability. And there's, layers of profitability or layers of business and human rights that are built into it. Now, it is not mistaken that AAS actually in March, late March, tried to announce that they are now open for foreign investment or are going to be protecting foreign investment, while the violations of Rohingya continue. And it didn't just happen in May. It was already happening since January, end of January this year. And I am not only trying to highlight these violations, but I'm highlighting the kind of impunity we are seeing playing out across all ethnic armed groups. And this may seem so counterintuitive or very, very contentious in these discussions, but it's important to actually highlight because we're talking about ideologies here. We're not talking about who does what, but the ideologies that go on to build these ethnic armed groups or armed groups in general are actually copying the models that the military junta has actually created. And so this issue of impunity will not end unless we have armed groups that actually subscribe to international humanitarian or human rights law. And this, the lack of accountability. I have not seen one single armed groups that have actually been able to showcase the kind of work that they have put into in actually not only punishing the people who violate human rights, but also the prevention part. And so this is the worries that the Rohingya have, and those of us who are actually currently trying to push towards accountability mechanism or transitional justice. The issue is the Rohingya are actually excluded from all these conversations that are being had by the NUG or the NUCC. And one example will actually help you understand what the situation is like. There is not a single Rohingya organization in the NUCC except for one, and they were not admitted on the merit that they're Rohingya, but they were admitted on the merit that they were women's organization. So we see this is not going to be a viable solution for ways forward. Say that the Arakan Army completely taken over the control of Arakan. It is not going to showcase that they're going to be able to build sustainable peace. And Thomas already highlighted that there are a lot of resources and various different infrastructures that are also still in question on how we are going to operate. The issue is there is no real social cohesion that is being built. The militant groups are currently just thinking about how to win, and other groups are completely sidelined. And I'm talking about groups that are, say, women's groups or any other groups that are trying to create some level of understanding between ethnic groups. And so there is no real acceptance of Rohingya on the ground belonging not only to Arakan but also to Burma, Myanmar. And this is going to be a sand in this perfect plan that some people supposedly have. And it will actually knock a lot of things over, because this has been ongoing for years and years on end. And without being able to protect the Rohingya or actually allow safety and protection of Rohingya to prosper, it will actually create further issues. And if the Rohingya issues never get resolved, forget about sustainable peace in Burma, Myanmar.
Right. Thanks, Yasmin. And in terms of the on-the-ground situation and your thoughts on some of this debate about the recruitment of, well, clearly we have seen a lot of videos and there is strong evidence that Rohingya are being used by the SAC in some of these attacks in northern Rakhine. Are they mainly conscripted? Are they voluntary? Are they being deceived? Have you heard from your own networks that some are offered citizenship, sign up, either get killed, injured, or stay in the army in the hope that they will get the citizenship? Are they paid? What's your sense?
So I think I need to paint a picture first of a group of people who have been living through extreme poverty for decades at this point, both in the camps, and in the camps has only been 7 years this year, but in Arakan it's been decades. The issue is the camp situation has deteriorated so much that people had decided to start leaving. And these are, information that we found on the ground when we visited Malaysia and Indonesia. And this was very clear that the issues of extrajudicial killing and security issues inside the camps have made people so feeling so insecure that they would be able to, have any prospect of any improvement at all. Now, in situations like this, sociologists have already sort of researched and basically come to a conclusion that the problematic population or demographic of people who are most likely to commit crimes are actually young men living through poverty. Now, the Rohingya young men are the ones that are actually being forcefully conscripted. Certain ones are actually voluntarily doing it. I don't understand why, but there are many. About 5,000 Rohingya so far have actually been forcefully conscripted from both sides, from the Arakan Army and from from the military junta, and certain groups of Rohingya who were, conscripted, their bodies were returned to the Rohingya community by the junta because they were forced to actually become human shield and fight at the front line. That promise of citizenship were actually made by the junta, but I don't understand beyond this what was said and what was done. But as I have said, there's no promise from any groups that is actually going to help, or there's no guarantee from any of these groups that are, the player in this sort of violence that guarantees the safety of Rohingya or the return or the sustainable peace for Rohingya. But in situations as dire as ours, there are not a lot of choices. And these young men have been, having pent up energy that they're dealing with. They're not allowed to go to school. They're not allowed to do anything. Certain, groups of Rohingya inside the country or in the camps are actually not allowed to have any prospect of life at all. And so when people are dealing with these shortages and these repression, they're going to take it out somewhere else, somewhere that they think, would actually help the community, or somewhere that they think, would actually move them up in terms of social mobility. So it is unfortunate that some groups decide to fight with the junta, because that's just absurd. But unfortunately, some groups have been primed from the very beginning to collude with them. And unfortunately, the death of many Rohingya who have had to fight on the front lines are not just the ones that are actually voluntarily conscripting themselves into the junta.
Do you think the offer of citizenship, it's understandable that some of them crave that so much, they're deluded and agree, and how much do they, I mean, that clearly would suggest a very, very strong desire for...
I think deep down, all of the Rohingya understand that the citizenship alone will not help us being able to return to return home or have any prospect of living life safely in the country. But I think that that seems promising enough for them to think that perhaps they will be able to be better off than other groups of people in our community. The issue, though, we also have to understand that there have been 3 lost generations of Rohingya who are not allowed to go to school, and they have not had any opportunities to actually educate themselves. And you have to understand that this is a group of people that have high illiteracy rate. So the ways that our community actually spread information is through WhatsApps, for example. And it's not through typing, it's actually through voice messages. Because people actually cannot type, they don't know how to read and write. And so we are asking a group of people who've not been, having any access to education or critical thinking skills to think critically about an offer that's on the table that potentially will be able to help them move up social mobility or have some level of safety. So I'm not going to claim that it's understandable that they do this, but what other choice do they have? Right. And this is the exact same thing that the High Commissioner for the Office of the for OHCHR have said. There's really nowhere to flee and no choice left for Rohingya.
Right. Thank you very much for that. We'll just move maybe to a bit of discussion and questions from the floor. If anybody would like to ask a question, just at the microphone over there, you're very welcome to ask all of the panelists or any, but in the absence of questions, I would also like to ask about, there's been a lot of speculation and pressure on the AA to enter ceasefire. They did do so as part of the Brotherhood Alliance in northern Myanmar, as we saw. Not that ceasefire has been very successful, but they did attend various meetings related to the ceasefire, and then made a statement that any agreement they make on ceasefire in northern Myanmar has no bearing on their situation in Rakhine State. But obviously China, apparently, by all reports and some very well-informed reports, China has been urging them to consider or discuss or negotiate, which doesn't seem very likely to me. But have you got thoughts on that? Well, Tom, we'll start with you, and if you...
just to pick up on one thing that
Oh,
Yasmin
yeah, sure,
said.
please.
I mean, I don't think that was necessarily contrarian to what we were saying.
What was?
Oh, well, Yasmin started by saying what she was about to say might, be contrarian with what Chorsan Lang and I had said, but I mean, there's nothing really to argue with there.
Right.
And her point about usage of Rohingya armed groups, if that implies a level of acceptance among Rohingya communities, I mean, that's not the case. Like, it's very evident. The pushback in the camps to forced recruitment, for example, mass gatherings don't happen in the refugee camps, really, because the Bangladesh authorities don't allow them. So to see thousands of people gather at night time, women mainly, armed with sticks to try and beat up RSO operatives, I mean, that's a pretty startling sight, and it gives you a sense of how bad things are, right. But also the lack of support for the RSO. ASA was very unpopular previously, and
in
RSO,
the camps,
in the camps, and RSO emerged, and there was a kind of a turf war, and many ASA members swapped sides and joined the RSO, and so the abusive practices that ASA was perpetrating against Rohingya in the camps, the same people who were doing it are now part of RSO in the camps. So we're seeing the same patterns of behaviour. Totally agree with what Yasmin said, and thanks for making that point.
Thanks for clarifying that.
On the ceasefire, I mean, I think there's a big difference between Northern Shan and Rakhine for China, because it's not on their border. Border stability is really important for China. We have seen Chinese civilians killed, injured in Northern Shan as a result of the fighting. And the ceasefire was essentially dictated by China, the terms. The parties were told to accept the deal. And we haven't really seen China do that in the past in Myanmar. Chinese authorities are trying to facilitate talks between Arakan Army and the Myanmar military, but it's different. They're bringing the two sides together. They're not sitting there and saying, this is the ceasefire and you're all going to accept it. Because I don't think they feel the need to do that in Rakhine State. They would like the fighting to end, but I think they feel comfortable that regardless of how the fighting turns out, whoever emerges on top, and that looks like it'll be the Arakan Army, that the Arakan Army will protect China's interests, that it knows what it can and can't do, particularly in relation to Chaopu and the energy infrastructure. While China would like a ceasefire, I don't think it feels a need to get involved and to force a ceasefire on the two parties. Yeah.
So you're saying China can live with the situation, even despite its very precious Chaopu infrastructure, development plans and all that. It obviously feels confident that whoever is in control in Rakhine will, will protect their interests. So they must have done deals with both sides. Are you suggesting that China and the AA have reached an accommodation?
Well, I mean, they've been engaging. The AA emerged on the China border. Arakan Army's closest international partner is China. They've been engaging closely for more than a decade. I think there's an understanding on both sides as to expectations, and the Arakan Army knows what they can and can't do in Rakhine State, in relation to Chinese interests. Arakan Army emerging, as the dominant power in Rakhine is going to have implications for Chinese ambitions. I mean, it's one thing to protect existing infrastructure. It would be another to develop new infrastructure in that environment. So the deep sea port and special economic zone. You know, these are agreements that have been reached with Naypyidaw. How do you develop those projects when Naypyidaw is no longer in charge? That's complicated. But protecting existing infrastructure, I think, is pretty straightforward.
That's a good point. And on the international front, India, and both Chosun Line and Yasmin, if you have thoughts on that. But just continuing with you, Tom, the Indian involvement and stakes in Rakhine, which, of course, they have a lot at stake as well.
Yeah, one of the interesting things over the past couple of months has been how, as the relationship between Arakan Army and Bangladesh has soured somewhat, or significantly, relations between the AA and India have taken a more positive turn. They're not natural partners. There's a lot of resentment from Rakhine people towards India. Maybe Chosun Line can go into that because he knows this topic very well. But it does seem to be moving us in a more positive direction. But it's also very complicated because of the federal, like Bangladesh is a unitary state, India has a federal system, so Arakan Army needs to engage with both New Delhi and Mizoram, and Chosun Lang already alluded to some of the complicated
You mean
politics.
India, not Bangladesh.
Sorry?
You meant India, not Bangladesh.
Yeah, like when Arakan Army deals with India, they need to engage both New Delhi and Mizoram.
You said Bangladesh.
Sorry, yeah. And as Chosun Lang mentioned, that's been really complicated, managing the relationship with Mizoram, because Arakan Army is now fighting in Chin State, and that, you know, has, well, the relationship with the CNF is not great at the moment.
That's the Chin National Front.
Chin National Front, another armed group. Yeah, so maybe Chosun Lang and Yasmin can add more to that.
Well, also, Chosun Lang, you might want to go into, since we're on this topic, the AA move into Chin State, Paletwa. You know, a lot of people are speculating, and suddenly there was panic a couple of months ago after AA took Paletwa in Chin State that they were going to resettle Rohingya in Paletwa, which I think was sort of touched off by some speculative article. So, yes, India. What's the Rakhine position on India?
I just would like to respond to some questions. I think...
Can you speak into the microphone?
Hello? Yeah. So, situation in Rakhine State very complicated. Also, in the Rohingyas, it is very complicated. So, as much as I know, like, a lot of the Rohingyas from Buddhist AA in northern Rakhine State, Mount Dor, currently they are moving to Sittwe, and the SAC helping them to come to Sittwe, and they are extortion. If from Buddhist AA to Mount Dor, if you come to Sittwe, you have to pay. Extortion. Extortion, and also like the Rohingyas who have ID, who have some different card, they left Sittwe, and many Rohingya now in Rangons. Even my colleagues, I have some Rohingya colleagues who left from the Buddhist AA now in Sittwe, they are waiting for ID, and because they want to leave Sittwe. And that is a situation. Also, the tension is not about the Rohingyas. Tension is also about Rakhine themselves. They have tensions because the 7 month already is conflict, and 9 or 10 townships are under ULA control area, and the city are also under ULA control area. But however, the IDP, they cannot return to their own city, so they have to live with their host communities. So you cannot live with a host community for 7 months. So because they have problem with the resource, because the pressure on the resource people, there's no supply, no business supply. So I think that it's quite complicated. So also I believe also the ULA they should improve about their governance. They should improve about their addressing the impunity, and also that is what my perspectives. I think the Arakan Army. Arakan Army or ULA, United League of Arakan, they only want to control, their intentions want to control northern Rakhine State, and suddenly they realize Myanmar military is not strong, so they are taking over one township to another. Now it's coming to cross the southern Rakhine State, and so even the Tendwe and Ngapali, which is southern Rakhine State, which has like very, how do you say, popular beaches. And then now the Arakan Army try to control the southern Rakhine State and respectively. So with later with the Chinas, I think I'm not sure it's like our borders country like India or Bangladesh or even the Chinas. I think they are, how do you say, they are betting for a winning horse.
Yes.
And they, how do you say, they are not.
They want to back the winning horse.
Winning horse. I think that is problem not based on the human right or humanitarian principle like this. So anything so like it doesn't matter how many Rohingyas or how many Rakhine people are displaced. For 7 months they've been suffering. All people are suffering. I think the Rohingya most suffer because they can move one place or another if you don't have ID. But equally, the Rakhine also having the suffering, and I haven't seen any humanitarian assistance, or I haven't seen any protections, the mechanism on the ground. I think that is the challenge. Even my moms under ULA control area, I cannot communicate with my mom for 7 months. So for example, so things are a little bit complicated, and also I think I don't know about relationship AA and Bangladesh and India, but I just from civil society perspectives, I think the only supply you are getting now is from India or Bangladesh, and now in Bangladesh, in India, the civil society from the Indians, the Chin civil society from India, they block all like supply to Rakhine because they say AA is allied with the Chin Brotherhood, and also the group who are blocking AA they are allied with the Chin Brotherhood. Chin Brotherhood is allied against with the CNF. Sorry. The civil society who blocking the humanitarian system from India, which are allied with the CNA and CNF. And it's very complicated.
That's the Chin National Front.
Chin National Front, and so I think the thing is also since AA control the Palawa in Chin community, they are divided. But in Palawa, the southern Chin state, which controlled by Arakan Army, and Arakan Army control because they have reason, because strategic way, and there's a two-country border, so they have to get supply from India. But the Chin people, they don't like that. Their city are controlled by Arakan Army. And in Chin, they are divided. Chin are very divided as well. So Arakan Army is allied with the Chin Brotherhood now, which are try to control the Matupi. But Arakan Army is not allied with the CNF.
So Matupi is in Chin State as well.
Yeah, and CNF is allied with the civil society in the Lai civil society who are blocking the trade.
Right.
So it's quite complicated. I don't know how we should improve. Right. Also, this is also situation in Rakhine State also, and many years since AA was very active since 2018 until now. I think AA is more focused about the military affair. Right.
But the question is, would they be open to ceasefire or not at all? I don't personally. I don't think so.
I think what my observation, because maybe AA don't want ceasefire because they can beat the SAC.
Right, that's right.
But I think the problem, the people are being suffering for 7 months and they have little assistance, even the non-assistance. I think the problem, I think all local media or international media, people more talking about in Myanmar, how many areas controlled by the ethnic angle, how SAC are defending themselves, but nobody want to talk about the how many people are displaced, especially the media. How many are displaced? What is the humanitarian assistance people are need? Where they are staying? The people I think there's no. I think this. I feel like glorifications about. So even my family, I have to fight it because my mom is supporting the Arakan Army. They always say how many townships we are controlled. Right. And even where do you live? You have to live in somebody's house.
You're saying glorification of the AA amongst Rakhine, a lot of
because they cannot set.
Your mother.
Yeah, they cannot set our governance. They don't have no help providing things. Right. And there's no school like for example this year school are open in June, but there's no any education program there. People have to organize, a family have to organize their own educations, so like home-based learning
And
system.
there's no internet either.
There's
so
nothing.
yeah,
There is
yeah,
nothing because,
yeah, so
but
it's
you
a
can
bit
get
desperate.
some. If you have like Starlink, you might have. If you are near Bangladesh border in Buddhist city, you can have you can have telephone because you can use Bangladesh SIM card. But it's mostly the northern Buddhist and Buddhist city and Mongdo and southern Buddhist. You can use Bangladesh SIM card.
Okay.
You know, so that's how you get some information for verification.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
And Yasmin, do you have any thoughts on any of that?
I probably won't be able to shed light on any of the ceasefire or the conversation that AA is having with other other actors, other states. But one thing that definitely comes to mind is the treatment of the Rohingya in India has been obviously reported through multiple sources that Rohingya are currently dealing with a lot of human rights violation by the government.
How many are we talking about? Do you know?
We're talking about the numbers that I have is about 40,000, and this was from our briefer co-published with ALTSI in Burma, and it's online. I will send it to you for later use. But basically, that's around 40,000 people that are currently there, and a few hundreds of them have been constantly dealing with raids. Detention, and these could become indefinite detention or forced deportation. And unfortunately, the situation will not get any better with the current, newly elected Hindutva, very, very right-wing government and quite Islamophobic at that. And so I'm not quite sure how much more precarious the situation of the Rohingya in India would become. But it also highlights the fact that a lot of this is happening elsewhere as well. This underscores the kind of the precarity of Rohingya everywhere, especially in Southeast Asia. To this day, there are children that are currently held in indefinite detention-like situation in Malaysia and in Thailand. We're dealing with very, very real issues of lack of protection everywhere Rohingya go. And it's sort of, as I've always said, it's sort of a trend or a propensity to actually keep violating or the Rohingya keep being violated everywhere that they go.
And do you think in all this mess, if the Arakan Army actually took over completely in Rakhine State, that might be the best prospect Rohingya might have to actually return? Can they trust the AA or?
I myself wouldn't trust the AA, but obviously this needs to go through a process of reconciliation. The country currently has no real plan for transitional justice. And this was the failure of, the transition to a more quasi-democratic establishment or the status quo in 2010-11. Now, in order to avoid that same mistake again, I think the NUG and various other actors, especially the AA, needs to come to the forefront and actually understand that they need to also hold themselves accountable, not only just for the violations of the Rohingya, but also the Rakhine people themselves. Despite all this glorification, there are real lives that are being lost, that are also being impacted. People in various different villages that have been shot, killed, kidnapped, various different kind of torments that took place. I think in order for the country to be completely rid of this ideology of glorification of military and, might is right always, is to ensure that militant groups, armed groups, are actually the ones that have a system that's built in, that have a full subscription to, to international human rights law and humanitarian standards. But until then, how we motivate these groups to actually come together for, to forge a path towards sustainable peace, I have no idea.
Right.
On the side of the civilians, on the side of the civil society groups, we are currently trying to have these conversations, but the ethnic divides have become so deep-seated in the country that it's so difficult for the Rohingya to start any conversation about transitional justice because we're constantly excluded from all these conversations. And unfortunately, like it or not, the NUG actually favors the Rakhine group, or because of the AA. It seems that the NUG does not want to actually step on the AA's toe, so it does not matter what the AA does. The accountability mechanism will not be enabled or activated in any way, shape, or form. And so this is sort of a fatal flaw that we're dealing with nationwide.
Right, that's a deeper problem, and I think the subject of another panel, I would say. So with that, unless, if we have one question, please identify yourself.
Yes, thank you. Sam Wright, club member. There's a contradiction I would like some clarification over, if you could. The Chinese vie with the Russians for providing most of the ammunition given to the junta. Therefore, when the AAs are being killed, it's a 50-50 chance that they're being killed by Chinese weapons, armaments, bullets. And yet, the impression I get is that the Arakan Army sees the Chinese as somehow allied or friendly, or they're protecting their interests. Do they not experience a contradiction? Is there not, how do they rationalize the fact that they're being killed by Chinese bullets and they're supporting Chinese interests?
Okay, I think any of you could answer that. Tom,
Sure.
you've got to ask where the AA get its own ammunition and guns.
Yeah, I think actually I don't know what Arakan Army is allied with Chinese purpose, or I think, but what I'm ethnically Rakhine, so what I see with the Arakan Army, because they don't like Myanmar military, so they want to topple, or they want to make sure Myanmar military go back to Naypyidaw. I think that is their intentions. And then, so I think, so what is their ideology? They can ally anybody if they got support, and to make sure the Myanmar military is not in Rakhine State, and that is what they stand for. And then, yeah, so.
Right.
Yeah, so I just not only Arakan Army, I think a lot of Myanmar ethnics grew up like this. And then I think positive, they don't like Myanmar military, and second, they have to improve their way of governance, judiciary, everything. So like, so a lot of people join Arakan armies, and you can ask them what is your ideologies. As much as I observing, they will say we don't like Myanmar militaries. That's why we have to fight about Myanmar military. So it's more about like this.
Right.
So, and then, yeah.
Thanks.
So I don't know where they get wealth from, but according to AA general, is they are receiving some wealth from cocaine and work, and that is what they
Which
said.
is from China, really.
Yeah, it could be China.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
sure, I think Tom's done a bit of investigation on all this, Tom. Why don't you?
No, I wouldn't say that. But yeah, I mean, as Cho San Lang said, most of the Arakan Army weapons come from armed groups along the Chinese border. The Wa have factories to produce small light arms with components that come from China. So it's a reflection of how China hedges its bets. I suppose that's like the nice way. You could say they play both sides. But I think probably their assessment is that while the Arakan Army is going to be dominant in Rakhine State, the Myanmar military is going to remain in Naypyidaw, so they need to have relations with both sides. And I think that's another reason why they don't want to get too involved in the ceasefire discussions. They don't want to be forced to take a side. I mean, they don't want to. Yeah, China. I don't think they want to be perceived as taking a side. But on the weapons specifically, I mean, I think the light arms and bullets and so on that the military use are not really coming from China. The larger hardware would come from China and Russia, but the Myanmar military produces these things itself in its own factories. And one of the Arakan Army strategies is to build up resistance groups in Magwe region.
Which
so
is central Myanmar.
Central Myanmar, where a lot of those military factories are located. And I think even if the fighting ends in Rakhine State, Arakan Army will be supporting Burmese resistance groups in Magwe region to try to attack military weapons factories in Magwe. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as simple as Chinese bullets being used to kill Arakan Army fighters. It's a much more complicated relationship, I think.
That's why I say it's a contradiction.
Yeah.
And is the Arakan Army saying to China, stop supporting the junta and we'll maybe listen to you? Or do they just accept that they're being shot at from both sides? China's supporting both sides.
Yeah, I think...
Well, he just said they're hedging their bets on both sides.
I think the Arakan Army understands the Chinese perspective, that they feel they need to work with both sides. You know, I mean, Min Aung Hlaing, the junta chief, he is incredibly angry at China because the way he sees it, China is arming insurgent groups in Myanmar. So it works both ways. I mean, you can call it a contradiction, but that's the reality, you know, in Myanmar.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I think with that we'll close up unless any of you have a compelling point to make. Well, it's all been very compelling, and I'd like to thank our three excellent panelists and you all for coming today, and keep an eye on our website and Facebook for further events. We have a Myanmar-related event on Monday night, the launch of an excellent compilation of essays by a range of artists, academics, ordinary people of life under the coup, post-coup life in Myanmar. That's on Monday night here from 7 o'clock. And tonight, for a bit of lighter relief after this very depressing and sad topic, we've got the trivia night, which is good fun, open to all, free. You can come by yourself. You don't need to be in a team. So anyway, thank you for coming, and please keep an eye on the website. Thank you also to Kuntam for handling a complicated series of streaming and graphics. And thank you, Yasmin, Tom, and Josan Lang.
Thank you.
Thank you.